Hello, welcome back to my kitchen. Today we're making pecan pie squares, a recipe that has been sitting open as a tab on my phone for like 2 months or so. I can't remember where I found it, but I saw it and was like, that looks good. But I have leftover ice cream back from the Jell-O recipe episode, and this just seemed like a good item to eat with that. So I'm making this and I'm gonna eat those together, and I hope that it's delicious. In green screen news, I did not pre-plan a bit to incorporate into today. So what I'm gonna do is we're gonna have a game where I'm going to dress as Waldo and record myself in front of the green screen so I can edit it in at some point. And you are gonna play Where's Waldo in the episode. So you have to try and find Waldo. It might pop out from behind the jars while I'm talking. Who knows? But you just, first person to shout out like the timestamp will win kudos, because I can't think of a tangible thing on the spot. So I'll give you like a shout out of like, hey, this person has great eyeballs in the next video, which that's gonna be tricky because I usually film on the same day that I drop. So we'll see how I figure that one out next week. But for this week, try and find Waldo. It's gonna be fun. And I think the ravings of a madman have finished. So why don't we run through the ingredients and then get into cooking? 1 cup of flour, 1/4 cup of sugar, 3/4 cup of butter, 1/2 cup of maple syrup, 1/4 cup of brown sugar, 2 tablespoons of milk, and 1 1/4 cups of chopped pecans. The first step, super simple step, however, I do have a little bit of a rant. So I'll get the step out of the way first, which is we're going to use a hand mixer to blend together the flour, the sugar, and 1/3 cup of the butter. So the butter is not one volume, because 3/4 cup is how much is being used in this recipe, but only 1/3 is used in this step. So be mindful of that. So butter, flour, sugar, going together, blending, should be kind of a grainy texture. The rant is, they actually call for margarine, but I don't play that game, so I'm using butter. They also don't say, should it be at room temperature or not? And I realized, because spoiler alert, I've done this step already, that it probably, because you're effectively kind of like creaming the sugar and the butter together, and so that requires room temperature. Well, I guess you're not creaming because you want a grainy consistency, but if it was solid, it would just stay as chunks. So I got it to room temperature by throwing it in the microwave, which overdid it, so then I put it in the freezer. So that's why it looks like pudding almost in the step. But the texture came out okay, so I think we're good. But word of the wise for you, just put your butter out like an hour before you start this recipe, and you should be good to go there. The other final little bit of this rant is the flour. They specify Bob's Red Mill 1:1 baking flour, which luckily I have on hand, so I'm just gonna use that. I don't know if other flours will work. Typically, if a recipe calls for a branded flour that isn't like their own brand, I assume there's a reason. So I'm just following that, and hopefully it should be fine because I'm following what they're saying. But if you don't follow that, it might be okay. I'm not sure. I probably should have looked at the ingredients on the Bob's Red Mill versus like my King Arthur to see what their differences are. But I didn't, because I'm a terrible informer. Just buy it. It's pretty easy to find. Or don't, and see what happens and let me know. Anywho, why don't we start this step and I'll stop talking. Next, we want to prep the 8x8 pan by kind of greasing up the edges, which I'm just gonna use the butter wrapper that I have on hand already because it's there. And then we also want to put in parchment paper. And the reason for the butter is because the parchment paper will only cover 2 of the edges, so there's gonna be 2 sets, or not 2 sets, 2 exposed still, so you just wanna make sure that there's no sticking happening there. But the parchment should overhang a little bit. And then after it's prepped, then you want to take the crumble, which will be our crust that we just made in the previous step, put that into the 8x8 and then kind of press it down. And I think this is gonna kind of become a bit of like a shortbread crust, but we'll find out if I'm right about that when we taste test. The next step is going to be to bake the pie crust that we just kind of prepped in the pan at 350 for 20 minutes. The next step is going to be on the stovetop in a small saucepan. We're going to mix together the syrup, the brown sugar, the remaining butter, the pecans, and milk. Then we want to bring all that to a boil, then simmer for 2 minutes, and then you're good to go there. I will point out the recipe does call for almond milk, and I don't have that. So I'm just using whole milk. I do have oat milk, and I kind of debated on which to use because oat milk is probably closer in consistency to almond milk, but I went with the whole milk because I know that sugar and whole milk make like caramel, and that sounds like a great topping to go on top of the like shortbread crust thing that we might be making. So I made that executive decision. I will let you know taste-wise at the end how that goes, and you can kind of choose your path accordingly. Okay, so the crust has finished baking and we have that kind of syrupy pecan topping. We're going to now pour the topping on top of the crust and then put that back in the oven for another 20 minutes. All right, now that it's done baking, next is just to let it cool completely and then cut into whatever sizes you want. I mean, it says 36, but you're a grown adult. You know how much you can eat. So just cut it up into serving sizes, and then it's the best step, which is to taste it. Here we have them. They smell fantastic, but do they taste fantastic? That's what we're here to find out. And I have a little piece here because they're not the most structurally sound thing. Like if you pick them up, they'll hold their shape, but eventually gravity will split in half. But I now have a nice little bite-sized piece to taste test, and I'll let you know how it tastes on the other side. Those are quite tasty. They are very sweet, and I need to look back at the recipe to see if I missed adding salt, because usually baked goods have salt in it. And these, I didn't put any salt in it, so I don't know if it just doesn't call for it, because that salt content kind of balances out the sweetness, and I don't know, something about it. There's a whole thing, like Alton Brown did an episode of Good Eats where he explains it all. But usually something sweet should have a bit of salt in it to kind of, I don't know, like round it out. You might be able to do it by using like salted butter, or if they have like salted pecans, like you can use that and then like the top would be like a bit of like sweet and salty, or just sprinkling salt on might also work. That's kind of like the criticism that I have of this. But overall, super easy recipe. Like I had everything on hand, so that just makes life easier. Nothing on like the list is super tough to find. Maybe the Bob's Red Mill flour, just because gluten-free flour is kind of hit or miss depending on what store you have access to. But I think they sell that on Amazon. I can't remember where I bought that from. I think I might have bought it from Amazon for a different recipe that I made. But like overall, the hardest step, in all honesty, was just waiting for it to fully cool at the end. And I even kind of sped that process up by making a little contraption out of a like baking sheet, a wire rack, and then I put on top of that in front of a fan. I have a little picture here. And the airflow should just kind of cool it off a little bit quicker. Little bit of engineering feat there to try and speed this process up, because it's kind of late and I wanted to taste it before I went to bed. And so I did that to try and speed up the process. So it pretty much fully cooled it in a little less than an hour, which coming out of a 350 oven probably would take a couple hours, if not for rapidly pushing air through it. So overall, I'd say give this a go. It's delicious. Maybe try and find some way around the lack of salt thing, or maybe I just forgot the salt. That could also be viable because I just write the recipe down. I'm not looking at the actual given recipe, so sometimes I miss things. I don't really have anything else there. I'm trying to think if I missed anything, but like simple, effective. I don't know, like, because it's sweet, you probably do want to have the portion size smaller. I did a 4x4, so it's 16, and that feels like a good size to me. But I guess if you don't want as much sugar intake, then maybe make it a little bit smaller. But the 36 portion seems like it would be like that big. But yeah, so that's all I have for you. These are tasty. I'm gonna go eat a full one with some ice cream, and I think that's gonna be fantastic. Maybe I'll throw it in the microwave to like reheat it up, because I feel like it being hot with the ice cream, that sounds like money. So on that note, bye Mom, still not dead. See ya.